3 years ago, debris from a shattered alien ship traveling through the solar system was discovered in space. Since then, it has been falling to Earth, bringing with it countless mysteries. A man enters a hotel and heads to a room where two people are waiting for him. He hands over a case and receives money in return, but then he reveals another package, offering it for sale as well. At that moment, federal agents enter the lobby. A lookout alerts his accomplices. They try to flee, but all exits are blocked. The man with the case hides the package in a drawer and runs to the balcony on the second floor. The agents pursue him, and moments later, witness his body falling from the balcony. Meanwhile, a cleaning lady finds the package and pulls out a strange piece of debris. Moments later, her body crashes onto a table in a restaurant 14 floors below. MI6 agent Finola Jones and FBI operative Brian Beneventi begin their investigation. It's already clear that the woman came into contact with a piece of alien spacecraft debris. The agents attempt to identify the men caught on the hotel's surveillance cameras, but no one seems to know who they are. Meanwhile, a car drives along a rural road. A boy talks about circus acrobats, but suddenly the woman with him starts bleeding from her eyes and freezes in place. The boy pulls her body out of the car and it hovers in midair. The agents, working from a flying headquarters, review the footage. Finola hopes the debris can help change lives for the better, fulfilling her late father's dream. Her father was a physicist who believed in the potential of these discoveries. The agents are called to investigate the floating woman's body. Brian unclasps her hand and the body begins to move, defying the wind's direction. The team follows the body and discovers several more people floating in the air current. The people are not dead, their brains are functioning, but it seems all muscular energy has been drained from their bodies. The agents try to contact the victims' families, but one of them, Mrs. Vanderberg, does not respond. The agents visit the Vanderberg residence and find her hovering body in the forest, along with a piece of alien debris. Searching the house, they discover a photograph of the boy from the car. They quickly trace the address of the boarding school where his sister Isla studies. She shocks Finola by revealing that her brother died in a car accident 7 months ago. Meanwhile, the boy befriends a woman at a gas station who takes him into her car. Finola later visits the forest and sees her deceased mother standing near the debris. Isla later explains that their mother had promised to show her something incredible. Their family had been struggling after her brother's death. Finola confesses that her mother passed away from cancer 2 years ago. The debris seems to have pulled her image from the depths of Finola's mind. It appears the same thing happened to Mary Vanderberg. The entity, appearing as her son, seems to draw energy from people, draining their muscular strength. First it was Mary, and then the others. Back in the forest near the debris, the men from the hotel appear, but upon seeing security, they swallow something and disappear. One of them reappears under a city bridge, hears a plea for help, and fires his weapon. The agent's helicopter tracks disturbances in the area and discovers the man's body fused into a bridge support. The FBI suspects these men are part of a powerful organization. Finola finds a connection between the victims. All had disappeared near the accident site where the boy had died. The agents visit the gas station where Mary and her son had been. They find the woman who picked up the boy after his mother's death. While Brian questions her, Finola tries to talk to the boy, who insists he needs to be there. Brian's interviewee suddenly collapses, and Finola grabs the boy's hand. When Brian can't find his partner, he realizes the entity has taken control of Finola. He goes to Isla and begs her to reach out to her mother's consciousness, or all these people will die. Isla pleads with her mother to return, growing increasingly desperate. When Isla finally screams, her mother opens her eyes, and all the other victims recover as well. Finola finds herself alone on a road. Later, she reveals that Mary discovered the debris in the forest and saw the image of her son every day near it. One day, the boy appeared alive. The next morning, Brian is informed that the man fused into the bridge support has been identified. He was with Finola's father, George Jones, though Brian is advised not to tell her. Meanwhile, in the town of Fleetwood, a strange force field forms, pulling metallic objects into a single location. The agents arrive and learn that the residents have been evacuated, but no debris has been found. Soon they detain a man who remembers only his name, Eric, and that he must do something. Satellite images reveal that the town is now encircled by a ring of metallic objects. Finola tells Brian that she spent the night sitting by her father's body. Before he voluntarily ended his life, he sent her a cryptic message. "You are not alone." They see Eric again, acting aggressively and forgetting he already spoke with them. He manages to escape, and the agents split up, each finding another Eric. Now they have 3 Eric clones. The first one searches for something, the second needs to fix something in his career. The third has lost his girlfriend. At one point, the third Eric asks about a glowing orb, but no one else has seen it. Finola theorizes that the real Eric is still somewhere in the city. It becomes clear that his home is at the center of the circle. Meanwhile, Michigan, 6 an FBI leadership coordinate to address the problem of tracking the mysterious organization known as Influx, whose member was the man found dead under the bridge. In Fleetwood, the agents discover a hole in Eric's roof created by a piece of debris. During the search, Finola finds Eric, who has no memory of recent events. Brian, exiting the basement, suddenly encounters a clone of himself. Forced to defend his life, he shoots the clone. The team works to secure the fragment when another Eric materializes in the middle of the room. Finola discovers a large amount of blood in the basement, leading her to believe the real Eric was injured and fled. It's revealed that Eric's car is missing. He likely drove it into the circle. At that moment, a two-headed Eric appears on the living room floor. The agents begin searching for the car. When they find it, Brian tries to pull the unconscious man from inside. Suddenly, the ring begins to pulse and contract, then shuts down. Eric regains consciousness and says that work no longer matters because he has found love. Sometime later, a telecommunications worker in Millersburg is performing repairs when she sees a square, hazy screen in a field. Through it, she glimpses the outlines of human figures. The agents fly to Ohio, where they are shown a recording of the phenomenon, as the field is now empty. No debris has been discovered yet. Later, while dictating a report, Finola hears a girl's voice recorded on her phone. The girl describes seeing lights and hearing people, but says she cannot escape. Brian hypothesizes that the screen is simply invisible at times. Suddenly, the square reappears. Finola attempts to communicate with the girl, who identifies herself as Nicole Hedman. Nicole claims she is alone, despite the visible presence of other figures nearby. Moments later, the screen collapses. It is revealed that Nicole was a real person who went missing in 2019. However, debris had not begun falling to Earth at that time. The next morning, technicians scour the field as Finola suggests that the missing individuals may exist on different frequencies. Reviewing George Jones's lectures, the agents find his assertion that the universe consists of far more than 3 dimensions, which can be unfolded to create access points. Brian discovers a map of the US highlighting these points, one of which is in the field. A technician works to figure out how to extract Nicole, but notes that a stable connection is required. Brian recalls that when Nicole became agitated, the signal strengthened. Nicole's father is brought to the field. He recounts how his daughter went to her car and disappeared. The agents play Nicole's voice recording, and her father cries with joy, having always felt she was alive and seeing her in his dreams. Later that day, everyone returns to the field. When the square appears, the father hears his daughter's voice. Nicole explains that she saw the field near a store and has been wandering there for what feels like hours. Unexpectedly, the screen begins to flicker and vanishes again. Soon, a report arrives about a piece of debris found nearby, but a car is also spotted in the area. It seems Influx has reached the field as well. The agents search the woods, unaware that members of the organization are hiding under an invisible shield. A technician theorizes that this debris still functions like a GPS, possibly used by the alien ship to navigate between dimensions, creating portals as access points. Around the same time, another fragment, completely drained of energy, is discovered. The decision is made to move the fragments closer to the field. When this is done, the screen not only reopens, but also expands, revealing people inside. Nicole reaches out but cannot exit. The technicians bring the second fragment and integrate it with the square. The portal opens fully. Finola manages to grab Nicole's hand, and suddenly numerous individuals appear in the field. They have returned from various places and times. Nicole explains that for them, only a few hours have passed, though it felt like time was moving very slowly. Meanwhile, Craig is informed that George Jones's body was swapped in the morgue. The next day, heavy rain begins over a small farm. It pours for hours, prompting a farmer to check his cornfields. Strangely, the sky beyond the rain is clear. However, when the man steps out of the downpour, he begins choking and dies. The agents travel to the farm, aware that debris fell there around 3 a.m., shortly before the heavy rain began. The rain now covers an area with a radius of 800 meters. 3 people have died, seemingly suffocating after leaving the rainfall. Their lungs exhibit signs of chemical damage. Wearing protective suits, the agents enter the affected area, where frightened farm workers explain that breathing has become increasingly difficult. They also report that an 8-year-old child is missing. That night, everyone heard a whistling sound. Some tried to leave, but their car engines wouldn't start. Those who left on foot perished. Finola steps outside to call in a support team, while Brian searches for the debris. At the edge of the affected zone, he finds the missing boy and reunites him with his mother. Meanwhile, a man from the farm approaches the technicians, demanding to join his family. Ephraim is upset at being denied entry and dismisses the danger. Finola calms him down. Later, Finola reviews an analysis revealing that the air beneath the rain cloud is composed of chlorine, nitrogen, and argon, an atmosphere potentially characteristic of other planets. It becomes clear that the debris is terraforming the area, creating conditions unsuitable for human survival outside the zone. The affected region is expanding, raising the possibility of evacuating the county. Finola collects a blood sample from Ephraim, then ventures inside the zone to gather samples from his family for comparison. A team arrives to retrieve the debris, but Finola urges them to wait until she devises a plan to save the people inside. Brian, however, reminds her that they cannot risk the safety of the entire county for a few dozen lives. Finola analyzes the blood and discovers changes in the people within the circle. Current technology cannot reverse the effects. Suddenly, she recalls debris hash 489, which can place organisms into stasis. It's a temporary but viable solution. Her proposal is approved and the debris is brought to the site. Meanwhile, Finola's MI6 handler, Ferris, contacts her with shocking news. Her father is still alive, and Brian deliberately concealed the truth from her. Finola decides to tell Ephraim the truth, giving him the freedom to choose his next steps. She explains that the people inside will feel nothing. They won't age and will simply wait until a cure is found. Ephraim rushes to his family, determined to stay with them. The debris is activated at the farm. Shortly after, the affected individuals are encased in stasis cocoons and the rain stops. Sometime later, a Boston City bus is on its route when all sounds suddenly vanish. The bus teleports through a portal and crashes into a parking lot. An injured young man emerges and spots a bald man standing nearby. The agents fly to Boston, investigate the crash site, and learn that a man died after escaping the bus. Brian recalls a similar incident in China involving debris that had since been stolen. Everyone who investigated the case in China died. One agent mentions that witnesses heard a high-pitched noise resembling a squeal shortly before the event. Reviewing surveillance footage, the agents see the bald man observing the crash. Finola notices a cup he left behind and orders it dusted for fingerprints. The pair then examines the deceased man's body. It's evident he was shot immediately after escaping the bus. His blood, a patch of skin, and a lock of hair were removed. Finola attempts to review the file from China, but finds it missing from the server. Fingerprint analysis identifies the bald man as Peter Eichmann, a former paramilitary operative. He entered the country with an EU passport and was greeted by the same bearded man who had repeatedly appeared in their investigations. Finola asks Ferris to retrieve the Chinese files. Suddenly, a piercing wail echoes through the streets. Brian immediately recognizes it as the sound that preceded the bus's disappearance. FBI technicians confirm that this wormhole is much larger than the last one, spanning several city blocks. The noise ceases as abruptly as it began. Finola and Brian unexpectedly encounter Peter, who points a gun at them. They draw their weapons in response. Peter tells them they cannot stop what is happening and shoots himself in the head. Ferris later calls Finola, informing her that the file will be delivered in person. Soon, a van arrives, and the driver hands her a flash drive, warning her that Ferris hasn't told her everything and that her father is not a clone. Reviewing the footage, Finola and Brian notice two excavators positioned across from each other. Finola deduces that wormholes are opened using two metallic structures as conductors. This means similar setups must exist in Manhattan. The agents identify several buildings with steel support structures and split up to investigate. At her assigned location, Finola encounters the bearded man's group. A shootout ensues, and the terrorists escape with the debris. The bearded man sends his partner through another spatial jump. Meanwhile, Brian discovers debris attached to a steel beam in his building. However, his group is ambushed by the bearded man's partner. Engineer Mallory is shot in the abdomen, but notices a synchronization signal. She guides Brian through the process of neutralizing the device. The bearded man confronts Finola on the street, remarking that she has her father's eyes. Suddenly, all sound disappears. The wormhole is about to open, but Brian successfully synchronizes the machine, silencing the signal. Agents apprehend the bearded man, preventing another catastrophe. Sometime later, Finola and Brian fly to investigate a new case. They arrive at a boathouse on the outskirts of a small town where 3 bodies have been discovered. A witness saw teenagers driving away from the scene. The bodies appear desiccated but now emit electricity. It seems another piece of debris is to blame. It is established that all 3 bodies belong to elderly individuals. Meanwhile, at Langley, Craig attempts to interrogate the bearded man, but he refuses to speak. Craig orders his team to hack into the man's phone. Shortly after, a report comes in about another missing elderly man. Using surveillance cameras, the agents track the car of two teenagers who were seen speaking to another missing elderly man. The car is soon found in the woods, with clothing belonging to the presumed victims in its trunk. Brian is interrupted by a call from one of Craig's subordinates, informing him that they are currently searching Fenola's apartment, a move that deeply unsettles her. Meanwhile, in a nearby park, a boy meets an elderly man named Sabash and convinces him to follow him into the woods. Brian confesses to Fenola that her father is alive. However, she already knows and doesn't understand why he's revealing this now. Brian explains that Craig ordered him to investigate George Jones's movements to determine whether Influx was monitoring the scientist. In the woods, the elderly man is handed a piece of debris by Kurt, who instructs him not to let go. Before their eyes, Sabash transforms into a teenager. At the same time, Kurt's friends approach the car, where an ambush has been set up. Brian apprehends one of the teenagers, who identifies himself with the same name as one of the missing elderly men. Kurt orders Sabash to flee with them. Meanwhile, Fenola catches up to one of the teenagers. When left alone, he suddenly ages rapidly and dies. It turns out that these children cannot stray too far from the debris, or they will quickly age. The two detained teens plead to be released, explaining that Kurt is leaving with the debris and they will die soon. They reveal that Kurt was the one who found the debris and, after rejuvenating himself, became determined to help others achieve the same. In the woods, a walkie-talkie belonging to one of the elderly men is found. Using it, the agents contact Kurt. Brian asks him to return, but Kurt explains that the more rejuvenated people there are, the farther they can stray from the debris. Kurt threatens to flee if his friends are not released, adding that their deaths would weigh on the agent's conscience. Information arrives identifying the car owner as Kurt Hawks. The woman with him is his wife Clara, whom he took from a nursing home where she was in the late stages of dementia. The agents head to the woods, attempting to convince Kurt to surrender the debris. Kurt explains how he discovered it, but refuses to return to his old age. Clara persuades her husband to stop, reminding him that they've already lived a beautiful life together. Kurt contacts Brian and informs him of their location. However, when the agents arrive, they find only the debris. Kurt and Clara leave the forest together. Sabash begins to age again after being taken to a facility where he can receive help. The case is resolved, but Fenola and Brian realize that their respective agencies have been lying to them. They decide to trust each other instead. Elsewhere at a dock, people wait for a ferry. Suddenly, time freezes. Everyone except for a woman and a young man with a large bag is immobilized. The man reluctantly hands over the bag, retrieves a pistol from his jacket, points it at his temple, and pulls the trigger. Brian arrives at headquarters, where Craig briefs him on what they've learned about the bearded man. His name is Anson Ash, a former paratrooper. His group focuses on tracking and collecting debris, but who founded or funds them remains unknown. Ash's phone is heavily encrypted, but it receives regular calls from Maine. Brian and Fenola are tasked with quietly investigating the location. On the plane, Brian confesses to Fenola that he told Craig the truth. Upon arrival, they learn that the woman who took the bag has no memory of the incident. Investigating family ties leads the agents to the deceased man's brother, Luke, who claims that Liam had found several pieces of debris and planned to sell them on the black market. A young girl, introduced as Caroline, enters the room. Luke calls her his niece. His service in Afghanistan piques Brian's interest as a former military pilot. While leaving the estate, Fenola remarks that they haven't inspected the swamp where the debris was supposedly found. They return, but as they approach the site, Fenola hears a whisper in her ear, urging her to leave. At Langley, Craig begins interrogating Anson Ash, cutting into his skull to implant a metallic shard under his skin. This shard is connected to a machine that delivers electrical impulses, allowing them to access Ash's consciousness. The agents visit Liam's ex-wife, who had fought for custody of their daughter, but suddenly gave up. She insists that Caroline must remain at the estate. Meanwhile, Caroline goes to the lake, where debris begins to emerge from the water and gather around her. She carries it to a shed and hides it there. Fenola and Brian return to the house, but Caroline runs away. Fenola catches up to her at the swamp, where technicians are searching for debris. Caroline warns her that they need to leave, or they will get hurt. At the same time, Brian finds the missing bag in the house. Caroline confides in Fenola, revealing her suspicion that Luke was responsible for her father's death and is preventing her mother from returning. She believes Luke can control people with his mind, but insists that he is evil. Meanwhile, Luke tells Brian that he wants revenge on the Air Force for what happened to his unit. Caroline admits that she hides debris, despite her uncle's demands to bring more and more of it to him. Meanwhile, Luke tells Brian that Liam discovered the debris, but didn't realize its purpose in fulfilling a greater mission. Luke then commands Brian to find Fenola, and the agent obediently leaves. Fenola orders everyone to evacuate the area. Alone with Caroline, Luke pressures her to reveal where the debris is hidden. Caroline reluctantly gives herself away, leading Luke to a stash of debris in the shed. When Brian and Finola return to their base, they suddenly realize they were manipulated into leaving Liam's property. Their attention is drawn to a strangely flying plane that crashes and explodes. Shortly after, Luke appears, holding a bag of debris. He forces arriving police officers to shoot at one another. Finola and Brian also point their guns at Luke, but he pours the debris onto the hood of a car and compels one officer to put his weapon to his own head. Just as the situation seems irreparable, Luke collapses. Caroline has struck him on the head with a piece of debris. Later, Caroline's mother arrives to take her home, explaining that some force had been preventing her from doing so earlier. Brian receives a call from Craig, who informs him that George Jones has been located. Elsewhere in a desolate area, a young woman in nothing but a shirt flees from danger. She spots a structure ahead and hides inside, where she sees a man standing over bodies in bags. Noticing her, the man quickly closes the shutters. Together with his partner, he tries to capture the woman who hides among the bags. Miraculously, she phases through one of her pursuers, leaving him fatally injured as she escapes again. Craig briefs a team preparing to rescue Jones. After the meeting, he takes Brian aside, instructing him to keep Finola away from the mission because the objective is to eliminate, not rescue Jones. Finola receives a call from Ferris, who tells her that after the mission, a plane will be waiting for her and her father on a forest road. The agents share their assignments, and realizing Jones will not be safe in the US, Brian decides to help the father-daughter pair escape. On their way to the rendezvous, they encounter the fleeing woman from earlier. Brian notices ripples in a puddle, throws sand into the air, and reveals her hidden form. Finola observes a burn mark on her skin. The woman explains that experiments were conducted on her and identifies Ash in a photo, though she has not seen Jones at the base. As she is placed in a car, the woman suddenly mentions that she doesn't know where the glowing orb is. The agents arrive at the base. While searching the premises, Finola finds boards covered with formulas and recognizes her father's handwriting. They discover people strapped to beds, free them, and send them to safety. Finola and Brian then enter a laboratory where a glowing orb floats mid-air. Security arrives, sparking a shootout during which Finola is injured in the arm. Despite her injury, Finola presses on and eventually finds her father. However, soldiers under Craig's orders raise their weapons to kill Jones. Finola shields him with her body while Brian opens fire on the soldiers. Together, they escape the base. Realizing that destroying the internal video recordings will erase evidence of Jones's presence, Brian sabotages the server room. He then contacts Craig, falsely reporting that Jones was not on the base. On the road, Jones expresses surprise at how they found him and marvels at the memory projection technology. He reveals that he had actually died, but was revived using debris implanted in his eye. Finola decides against sending her father to England. Instead, they hide him in a motel where he explains that Influx is actively seeking a dangerous piece of debris capable of destroying the world. He was kidnapped because he had invented a device that could track debris. Later, Jones apologizes to Finola for abandoning their family, but emphasizes that the stakes now concern all of humanity. He believes the debris is a gift, an alien technology that could save humanity by restoring forests and crops. To create a scanner to locate the dangerous debris, he needs help recovering his files, which are in Ferris's possession. Finola calls Ferris, refusing to turn over her father and demanding access to the files he needs. Meanwhile, Jones lays out aluminum foil on the bed, wrapping himself in it like a cocoon. Elsewhere on a coastline, a young man named Shelby runs to the edge of a cliff and dives into the water. Later, he is seen in a house searching for his sister. Instead of her, a boy appears, claiming they have no sister. Finola and Brian take Jones to his former colleague, Garcia, who has some equipment. Since both agents are now working against their organizations, they resolve to stick together. They receive a signal about new atmospheric anomalies near Oceanside. The agents visit Shelby's house. Shelby greets them warmly and immediately explains that he and his sister found a piece of debris that transported them 2 days into the past. They enjoyed the experience and began experimenting, repeatedly creating time loops. In one loop, Shelby lost his sister Kathleen. He also reveals that this is not his first time meeting the agents. He knows everything about Jones and believes that the debris pulled him out of the timeline, as if extracting a card from a constantly shuffling deck. Returning Shelby to his correct reality, along with his sister, is like trying to return a card to its original position in an already shuffled deck. Finola calls her father, who advises stopping the time loops entirely. However, Shelby slips away again, diving into the sea to return to the past. The cycle repeats, but with increasing differences. For example, Shelby's brother is now a different boy who remembers Brian, surprising the agent. Shelby once again explains to Jones how the time travel works, describing the colors he sees during the transitions. At one point, he sees Kathleen in a mirror. Once more, Shelby runs off and jumps into the water to restart the cycle. In the next loop, Brian has a different partner. Shelby notices the changes and requests to speak with Jones, which confuses the agents since the scientist has long been dead. Shelby goes through the time shift again. Brian's partner keeps changing with each loop, creating a pattern. When Finola finally returns, it is to an altered timeline. Arriving at the house, she sees that Shelby has placed mirrors throughout the living room. Kathleen occasionally appears in these mirrors. Finola herself catches a glimpse of Kathleen walking past one of the mirrors. Later, Jones asks Shelby to recall the exact time he entered the portal and again pleads with him to stop the transitions. But Shelby is determined to find his sister, and when he prepares to jump again, Brian dives in after him. Both are repelled, unable to proceed. Brian becomes trapped in a loop, forced to relive events repeatedly. This time, he is thrown into a different reality where he has a new partner, while Finola has returned to Langley. Brian, however, remembers everything and demands that Shelby restore the timeline. The repeated jumps cause tears between realities to grow larger, revealing the people caught within them. Brian calls London and contacts Finola, explaining everything that has happened. He begs her to help, expressing his strong desire to return to her. In the next loop, Brian and Shelby travel back again. This time, his partner is Greta. Kathleen is alive, but Shelby is missing. Brian explains to Greta that the FBI only wants to secure the debris and doesn't care about the fate of those affected by it. Greta shows Brian the living room, where the degradation of space is advancing and flickering projections are now scattered throughout the house. If the realities continue to overlap, the universe could implode. Brian realizes they need Jones. Greta urges him to wait for specialists, but Brian mentions his connection to Jones, which frightens Greta. In this reality, Brian himself killed Jones during the influx raid. Hearing this, Kathleen runs to the sea. Brian follows her, and together they jump into another reality while holding onto the debris. This time, Finola and her new partner arrive at the house. They are greeted by Kathleen, who wants to contact her father, still alive and working with Craig. Kathleen shares everything she learned from Brian. Finola contacts her father, who repeats the same metaphor about the shuffled deck of cards. He insists that Kathleen must not jump again. Finola goes to the living room and sees a tier opening, through which she and Kathleen can see Brian and Shelby. Brian writes on a board that they can see the women. Kathleen ignores Finola's pleas to stay and jumps into the sea again. This time, tiers open all over the house. Kathleen communicates with Shelby using written notes, and Brian eventually joins them. Later, Greta and Finola arrive at the house, where they are partners in this world. The house is glowing with rifts, and Finola calls in a special response team. Kathleen meets with Finola and recounts everything that has already transpired. Brian and Shelby want to speak with her. Brian writes that a two-way deviation is to blame for the instability. However, Finola struggles to understand what this means or how to fix it. Brian insists, but the tier closes, and the special response team arrives. Kathleen convinces Finola to join her for more time to figure things out, and they jump together. This time, Finola remembers everything, and upon returning, relays the information to her father. He explains that a two-way deviation is like two threads of the same reality. All four of them must jump simultaneously, synchronizing their watches. Finola and Brian gather the siblings, set their watches to a 2-minute countdown, and run to the sea. All four successfully return to their original timelines. Finola and Brian visit Shelby and Kathleen, but unlike the siblings, they have no memory of what occurred. That evening, in a prison cell, Ash grabs a guard's hand as he delivers food through a slot. Somehow, Ash learns the code to the main door. Later, a group of agents investigates a forest for debris and notices a strange glow emanating from a woman sitting in the grass. When they call out to her, she turns and says Brian's name. Meanwhile, Finola calls her father and learns that he is heading to an antenna field, despite her instructions to stay at home. He once again asks for the files, and Finola promises to bring them as soon as possible. However, the agents must first travel to the location of the unknown woman repeating Brian's name. The woman named Muriel is a local school teacher, and a strange flickering phenomenon seems to follow her. When she sees Brian, she mentions a town in Afghanistan, Surobi. Brian confirms he was there, but is puzzled by how it connects to Muriel. Muriel is taken to a lab where she continues to repeat significant conversations from Brian's life, fragments of moments tied to Afghanistan. Then she grabs his hand, and Brian is seemingly transported into the past, reliving his military memories while his body shuts down in the present. Finola urges the team to locate the debris quickly, as Muriel and Brian appear to be connected through it. In Afghanistan, Brian continues his mission. One day, a girl named Asala approaches him on the road, asking for help saving her grandfather. She admits she loves music. In the present, Muriel transmits details of this conversation, even naming the real mission, which Craig also knows about. In Afghanistan, Asala and Brian meet again at a hospital. She tells him her grandfather was a doctor who knew 5 languages and taught her because she dreams of going to America to become a pianist. She leaves behind a photograph of herself. A few days later, Americans find Brian's lost camera, which contains pictures of Taliban leaders and the path to their hideout. In the present, Finola recalls the case of Brian's cloning via debris. She theorizes that debris might possess a collective consciousness that records Brian's memories, making some pieces focus specifically on his life. Meanwhile, agents discover the debris in the forest, but it is already depleted of energy. Finola suggests using electroshock therapy to sever the connection with Muriel. In Afghanistan, Brian thanks Asala for her help, but asks her not to take any more risks. Later, while reporting new intel to his commander, he experiences an electric shock in the present. His realities overlap, and Brian suddenly sees Craig, who is also in the tent. Craig, however, doesn't recognize Brian. Electroshock therapy in the present fails, leaving Brian trapped in his military past. The night before an important mission, Brian urges Asala to leave and take her grandfather to a safe place. During the battle, Brian stands abruptly, feeling compelled to stop something, but he is too late. He watches in horror as Asala is killed in the crossfire. Later, Brian helps bury Asala and suddenly sees Muriel sitting in a chair among the rocks. The woman extends her hand, and as Brian reaches out, he snaps back to the present, gasping for air. He rushes to Muriel, only to find her dead. Brian recalls that Asala had learned about the ambush and was afraid Brian would think she betrayed him. She had gone to warn him and was caught in the crossfire. The next day, Brian took revenge, unknowingly wiping out a group that was not to be targeted. He was imprisoned and nearly declared a war criminal, but was saved by Craig. Discussing the incident, the agents conclude that debris and humanity are studying each other. Brian, it seems, holds particular interest for the debris. Sometime later at Langley, a container holding debris suddenly falls from its shelf. Other containers begin moving as well. When a technician tries to intervene, one container strikes him on the head, killing him. Meanwhile, Jones reaches the antenna field. Finola and Brian join him there. The scientist explains that these antennas were used to broadcast news to Allied forces during World War II and could now assist in tracking debris. Finola worries about her father traveling alone across the country, especially with influx pursuing him. But Jones dismisses her concern, especially since she has brought him the files he needs to locate the dangerous debris. The agents are called away to investigate the incident at Langley. Craig is also present and theorizes that the debris may have been remotely controlled. However, this theory collapses when the agents enter the facility and find several specialists seemingly under some form of external control. The debris containers continue to move, as though being transported to a location where their contents are extracted, leaving the empty containers to return to the storage area. Not all debris is being taken. The affected personnel are moved to the medical bay, but for some reason, they all fall into a state of shock. Finola speculates that something is being constructed in a pocket of time-space using the extracted debris. She attempts to disrupt the process with electrical impulses. Immediately, the affected staff begin convulsing and contorting. They rise and walk toward the storage area. Brian follows them while Finola orders the debris to be removed from the facility. She believes the portal cannot extract items that are not nearby. However, when one of the workers touches a container, he is thrown backward and falls, entering a trance-like state. Finola calls her father and describes the situation. Jones identifies a pattern in the numbers assigned to the debris. He suggests altering the polarity to create an improvised force field that could prevent the debris from moving. The solution seems to work. The containers stop disappearing into the portal. However, a strong energy shift is felt in the basement. The agents head to the lower level, where they find a massive piece of debris embedded in the ceiling. On the wall, they discover a schematic illustrating how the debris is being weaponized, based on Jones's research. Finola accuses Craig of orchestrating the weaponization of debris, but he reminds her that every nation is engaged in similar projects. Meanwhile, Brian suddenly sees the deceased Muriel, who reaches out her hand. When he takes it, the connection feels real. At the prison, Ash requests to see a doctor. During the examination, the doctor is shocked to find shards of debris embedded throughout Ash's internal organs. Seizing the opportunity, Ash threatens the doctor, escapes his restraints, and frees himself. Brian, sensing a critical moment, asks Finola to stop interfering with the debris, claiming he has learned something important. Using a defibrillator, Ash teleports out of the prison. Back at the warehouse, Finola disables the lock, and the containers resume their activity. Brian identifies a missing component that allows the debris embedded in the ceiling to pass through the portal as well. Moments later, a glowing orb emerges from the portal. It ascends and pauses briefly in front of Finola before soaring into the sky and vanishing. The specialists regain consciousness. Jones informs his daughter that the critical piece of debris they need is located in Virginia. Ash learns of this as well. Meeting with his team, he races to the site. Upon hearing of Ash's escape, Brian and Finola head to Jones. Jones, surveying the forest, notices a strange rotating humanoid figure. He rushes back to wrap himself in foil. When the agents arrive, Jones urges them to leave immediately, stating that he has the coordinates of the debris. They soon arrive at a location where a large crowd of people is gathered, all staring eastward. Each person seems entranced and unaware of the newcomers. Jones explains that this debris is acting from a distance, somehow calling these people to it. It must be located quickly. Meanwhile, more individuals continue to arrive. When everyone suddenly begins laughing, Jones concludes that the debris is causing emotional convergence, a method of uniting people experiencing intense moments in their lives. Jones eventually locates the debris. The agents examine the documents of the entranced individuals and discover that all of them recently became parents. This suggests that the debris targets people with heightened emotional experiences. Meanwhile, Ash and his team stop at a gas station. One of them, Otto, brutally kills the people inside without explanation, then orders the team to proceed to the site. Finola notes that the crowd continues to grow and suggests finding a way to sever the connection. Jones calls his daughter for a private conversation. He reveals that standard neutralizers will not work. Instead, he proposes that Finola touch the debris, assuring her it is safe. When she does, he explains that the telepathic link between these people makes the debris as heavy as a large building. The link must be broken to move it, but this will have consequences. All the affected people will lose their memories entirely. Finola resolves to find another solution to avoid harming the people. However, Jones declares that there is no more time. Influx is on its way. He called them himself. Jones reveals that he intentionally ended his own life to be resurrected. This debris is just a small part of a much larger whole. He intends to use it to transform human consciousness, elevating humanity to a higher plane of existence. Finola draws her gun, but members of Influx arrive and restrain her. Jones informs Otto that a telesphere was born yesterday and emerged from the FBI office, but its location remains unknown. Using electronic equipment, the group begins severing the connection between the debris and the entranced crowd. Jones distributes pills to Influx members, ensuring they retain their memories. One pill is forcibly placed into Finola's mouth. Brian, however, is designated as a sacrificial participant along with 50 others. Otto activates the device, causing everyone to collapse. With the link severed, the debris becomes movable and is loaded into Jones's vehicle. However, Brian's memories remain intact. Otto inspects him and realizes that Brian is the third man, someone who has skillfully concealed his true identity. As Influx prepares to leave, Finola refuses to follow Jones. Brian explains that during the initial debris fall, he was injured alongside Garcia and a Chinese agent named Min. Since then, he has been taking medication provided by Craig. While driving away, Influx members notice the same strange rotating figure in the distance. It pivots and begins following them. Elsewhere in the prairies, a glowing orb arrives at an indigenous man sitting on the ground. The man welcomes the orb and leads it into a cave, where another Finola stands in stasis. The series Debris seems to have aspired to surpass the X-Files but struggled to maintain tension throughout. Nonetheless, it introduced a fascinating concept, highlighting that everyone operates with their own truth, logic, and beliefs. There are no absolute villains or heroes here, just as there aren't in life.